Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à cet événement Perspective Quantum numéro 9, un événement organisé en collaboration entre ISEC, l'Industrie des systèmes électroniques du Québec, Intric, le COPL, Centre d'optique photonique et laser, Québec Quantique Optonique et Numana. Donc, je me présente, Nicolas Godbout, directeur de l'Intric, l'Institut transdisciplinaire d'information quantique et directeur du département de génie physique à Polytechnique Montréal. Et je serai l'animateur pour la présentation d'aujourd'hui qui va porter sur la conception de circuits qui contient des puces qui font de la génération de nombres aléatoires. Donc, on a l'acronyme dans le titre QNRG, donc les Quantum Random Number Generation. Donc, it's our pleasure today to have as a guest Tom Stengel. He works at ID Quantic. He's actually the Senior Director of Business Development globally for all the QRNG line of products. So he's really the best person to talk to us about these applications. We will start by the presentation of approximately 45 minutes. I remind all the participants that you can ask questions at any time in the Q&A sessions or in the chat, and I will take a look at the questions. We will also invite the speaker who will have some time after the presentation. When we revert back to the tables at the end of the presentation, you will also have a chance to ask questions directly in small groups. So without further ado, Tom, go ahead and we need to learn about these QRNG chips. Go ahead.
All right, so first let me make sure you can see what I am showing. You can see the quantum technology and cybersecurity slide.
Yes, very well.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for participating in this in English because I don't speak French, although literally everyone else in my company does. But I'm out of Boston, even though we are headquartered in Switzerland. So just, where does it fit? Why am I talking today? Well, the starting point is there's another great thing going on in human history. After the Industrial Revolution and technology and digital revolution, the quantum revolution is coming now. And it's actually already here. There's already products out there, including, and I'm holding up for those of you who look at my picture, this phone here that I have, which is a Samsung Quantum 2 phone. There's already 5 models of phone in the world that have quantum technology in it already today. So it may be the beginning of the future, but the reason why the year 2020 is there is that's when the first commercial product went out. An earlier version of this phone was actually a model that came out in 2021, but the first version of a phone that was released using quantum technology was actually in 2020. What is it? Well, quantum technology is a lot of things. It's going to change many things. In fact, somebody pointed out to me that when I list quantum computing, I'm really blending two things, and there should be a fourth box here, which is quantum memory, which is, to me, it's kind of tied with computing, but they're right, and I'll probably update that in the future. There's a lot of different things you can do. Quantum sensing is already used to do things like checking out, 10, 20, 50 kilometers of fiber optic cable, for defects and things like that. I mean, there's already things going on, although for the sake of today's discussion, we're going to focus on using quantum technology for security. But why do we need to use quantum technology for security? Well, the fact is there's always hackers out there, and quantum computers already exist today. And today they're in the hands of big major companies. But in the not too distant future, who knows whether that be 3 years or 13 years or whatever the number will be, they'll become more generally available. And like all things, there's some good and there's bad. There's a lot of good that's associated with it. And there'll be some people, hackers or whatever you want to call them, people who want to do malicious things. So the quantum security part is more about protecting against that. When we look at the future, this kind of looks like a picture of today. The difference is instead of, data centers, There's memory centers that are going to be quantum memory. And instead of server farms, there's going to be quantum computer farms. And instead of regular internet connection with the today's existing, layer 1 through 4 connectivity of connecting server farms with data centers and things like that, there's going to be quantum repeaters and quantum QKD, quantum key distribution nodes and things like that. And at the end of the day, the thing that drives it all really is the user. And that's the picture that you see there is actually the phone that came out in 2020, the first phone to use the quantum technology inside of it. I actually have one somewhere around here, but I upgraded to the newer model, last summer. And, there's people working on everything in here, including quantum satellite, by the way. The part I'm going to talk about is only the security layer part, driven as the title of this speech says, the quantum random number generation. And I just want to talk about it. The future of more computing power. It's already here. Not only is it just quantum computing, even existing computers have gotten so very powerful that there's things they can do which can rip apart security, as we see every day, unfortunately, out there in the world. So the good news is that quantum computers are going to offer some real benefits. That some of the things they can do, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, are going to be hugely advantageous. And sometimes people stop me here and say, what do you mean by hugely advantageous? Big picture, you can talk about, what about the next time there's a new COVID-19? What new virus comes out? Picture taking that virus, if we had not only quantum computers, but the new kind of software algorithms we're going to write for quantum computers. But picture if they're available, and instead of cycling the genome of that new virus, as it took us with the coronavirus, took us a few months, how about cycling, getting a copy of that virus and a quantum computer completely going through the genome of that virus in an hour or maybe one day, and then how about that same quantum computer running a different set of algorithms and making some predictions on the best possible virus, this afternoon, so that the months that were taken before we could even begin to take those DNA strips and begin making sample vaccinations, that would be happening, the day after we found the virus. That's the kind of thing that can happen. But there's a whole nother thing that can happen too. And it goes back to that wonderful picture I was showing you here, all the users on the on-ramp. It's not just your phone, it's your car. I'm going to show you in a minute, but everything is already getting connected to the internet. But today, the existing computers and the existing algorithms, there's a limits to what they can do. It's very point-to-point oriented, and current computers running von Neumann architecture software, it one of the things that isn't done very well is like logistics. You have a city with a decent sized city with 1 million cars on the road in the morning, and they're all connected. Almost all of them are already connected, but soon they all will be connected to the internet and running whichever application they're running. And what if the information you could feed them was the optimum? And today, that's not the way it works. Today, that way it works is, even if you're running a tool like a mapping tool or a specialty traffic tool, it's an algorithm doing its best to predict what might be best for you. But often, since everybody else's algorithm is making the same predictions, that's not happening well. Quantum computers can do things that would actually be, it's taking millions of data points, instantaneously making decisions that are best. What about targeting things like zero traffic deaths and things like that? That's on the horizon in the near term with some of the computing power, and that's because there's two things that we get with the new quantum computing. One is a lot more computing power, but the other thing is there are some algorithms that you really can't run with serial processing. I mean, you can, but you take a parallel algorithm, you break it into serial pieces, and you lose a lot of efficiency. So I'm going to skip all the other cool stuff involved with quantum technology and now only talk about distill it down to the part for today's talk, which is cryptography. And what you're looking at here is cryptography we're doing today. There's nothing new yet that I'm showing you. And, there's a different kinds of cryptography out there in the world already. And for the sake of our discussion today, what I want to say that is, for the last 30 or 40 years, any significant deployment of cryptography has been key-based. And the key-based encryption is where the quantum random number generation comes in. And the quantum random number generation is used for the key part of making an encryption process. And I'm going to show you that in a few slides. So before I show you how it works, let's just talk about what it means. And what it means is every time you're making an encryption, you want to think of an encryption algorithm, all the different algorithms you're going to hear about that I'm going to show you. You want to think of those as the lock. And the key is the thing that you hold on to open the lock so that you can get your data or your treasure or whatever you want to call it. And, conceptually think of it like the lock on the front door of your house. You have a lock, you have your key that opens the lock, and your family members have the key, and maybe you have one trusted friend or trusted neighbor who has a sample of the key in case there's an emergency while you're away. And otherwise, you want to protect the key. You don't want anybody to be able to, open the door and get the treasure in your house. Well, mathematically, it's kind of similar idea philosophically, I would say. You have an algorithm, whether it's the older RSAs or ECC algorithms, or let's say a current AES algorithm, or a futuristic or near term, as we're almost there, PQC algorithms. But you all still need a key to open it up and get the data, and you don't want the bad guy to get the key. So very much like the front door of your house, right? You want to make sure that somebody can't pick the lock. Well, what does that mean mathematically? You want to make sure that somebody cannot reproduce your key, meaning they don't have a key, but they can open the lock anyways because they reproduce your key. And up until just a few years ago, the algorithms that exist to do that, and there are algorithms to do it, but they would take thousands of years to run on computers that existed up until, let's say, 10 years ago. And over time, that's sped up and sped up and sped up. And it's still to the point where it would take a long time to do it. But we are reaching the point, both with classical computers and in the near term, very easily with quantum computers, where they'll be able to run the algorithms to reproduce your key, the equivalent of picking the lock, if you will, meaning that you don't need to steal someone's key if you can pick the lock. And that's what it comes down to, is reproducing the key maybe is not exactly picking the lock, but I think you get the idea. So for different algorithms have different strengths, and with the post-quantum cryptography algorithms being worked on, that should be a very big jump forward. But please keep in mind, even with those future algorithms coming, they still use keys. The creation of a key based on random numbers is still part of the process. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time. I'm going to show you the different algorithms, but as the title of this presentation shows, I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the quantum random number generation portion of it. So having said that, this is just giving you a quick peek on what people have been doing for the last, 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 years. A long time ago, people did something called PRNG, pseudo random number generation. That's mostly died out now. People have been doing classical thing. You build a noisy system. I'm an electrical engineer by education. You do the opposite of what you learned in college. In college, you learn how to build circuits that don't have noise, how to filter out noise. And you do the opposite with what's called classical creation of random numbers. You build a circuit that is unstable and use that instability to treat it as a random number. There's a lot of problems with that. It worked great over the last 10 or 15 years, but at the end of the day, it's not provably random, and it can be affected by external behavior. As an example, everything mankind does creates periodic signals, right? The vibrate, different people on this phone call are in rooms that have heating systems, or some of you who I notice were in warmer locations have rooms that have air conditioning systems. That creates vibrations. You're in a car, there's vibrations. All of those things, even your refrigerator in your house, the fan in your computer, they all create periodic signals. So the idea that these classical systems are random is pretty good, but they can be polluted with non-random numbers. And when that happens, you can use those algorithms to reproduce the key and open the lock. So again, you're not stealing key, you're just making your own copy of the key. So the solution is quantum random number generation. We're going to get into that here. So the other thing to remember too is that people are like, okay, it's a problem for today. I sent the message. Now the message is sent. And because the message was sent, I don't have to worry about it anymore. But that's not true, because the message gets sent over the internet. And what the people are doing on the internet is, for data confidentiality, is the criminals, if you will, they grab stuff off the internet and they just save it. They're like, hey, it looks to me like Tom Stengel's phone was running an application to do banking with his bank. So save all of those data files, because even though we can't read them now, if sometime in the next month, we make a breakthrough and we discover that the key that was used to create his encryption channel for that banking activity was a weak key, because the random circuit was not so random. It was being affected by a periodic signal or something. Hey, guess what? We just reproduced the key. And even though it's a month later, we can open up and we can see his bank account number. We can see his social security number, whatever money's still in the account, we can go take it. So the thing to remember about data confidentiality is you have to act now, because it's not like once you send the message, if it gets through, you're safe. People have a copy of a message and they can decrypt it a year later. And unless you change your bank accounts every month, which most of us don't change them, even once a decade, the bank account, all that information is the same. If they can break your key 2 years later, they can still go to your bank account and get your money. That's just one quick example. So you have to act on data confidentiality now. This is just talking about that. The Q day is the day at which a given algorithm running on a given computer can break that key, can open it up and break whatever you encrypted and get it. And what you have to remember is that just because you encrypt something today before Q day doesn't mean you're safe, because the minute they hit Q day, what the criminals will do is they'll go and look at anything they have a copy of. And there are both governments and criminals who are saving copies of everything, and go and see what can they open up, what bank accounts are still valid, what social security numbers or information of value is still valid that they can take advantage of. And it may be something they collected 2 or 3 years ago. And they hit Q day. That's when their algorithm run on their computer can open up your encryption and read your information. So there's no time to waste on taking care of things. And frankly, everything has encryption today. Everything is connected, as it shows in the red thing in the middle. Today, my car, my car is only 2 years old. My car is connected to the internet. My house is connected. Many things in my house are connected to the internet. My phone, my payment, everything I do is connected to the internet. My local town is connected to the internet. It's all, apps on my phone. If the tonight's weather is going to be icy, my town just has it show up on my phone to be careful driving tonight. Everything's connected, everything's encrypted, and the minute somebody can gain access to those keys and step in, that means they can get everything that you're involved in. So you really need to put your attention to the best possible security now. And that includes using a quantum random number generation to do the best keys. So I'm going to, for time's sake, just jump through a little bit of this a little bit faster, but these are just some well-known things. These are all the different kinds of attacks people are aware of. And between encryption and authentication, they all involve random numbers at one level or another. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Let's get into the quantum random number generation. So the first thing is there's a tendency in security to have a herd mentality, to think like, look, I'm in a big herd. I'm in a herd that has 100 or 200 animals. So, and I'm okay because maybe one weak animal will get killed this week. So I'm okay. But when it comes to encryption and cryptography, you can't think that way. You have to break that natural thought to think of the words good enough. The words good enough are never good enough when it comes to security, because with modern computing, the minute they can break something, people can use computers to break everything. And they break something, then everything they have access to, they get immediately. There is no protection in the herd. There is no good enough. You cannot rely on obscurity. You cannot rely on being hidden in the crowd. Anyway, so strong random numbers are used to make keys. And so you need true random numbers, a pure random number, to make the strongest possible key. And for decades after the creation of what I would call modern encryption, people use pseudo-random numbers to create their keys for the encryption process. And that was satisfactory for decades because the amount of computing power available and the algorithms they could run couldn't really do much about it. A weak random number was still good enough. But that's not the case anymore. And that's why you want to switch to quantum random number generation as soon as possible. It's easy to do, which I'll show you later. But this is just giving you that quick idea of what's happened over time. I actually was involved with selling PRNG based products 20 years ago, one of my first sales jobs after I left being an engineer. And over the last 20 years, I've seen a radical shift in the quality and capabilities of creating random numbers. And we just barely staying ahead of the rise of computing power and the type and complexity of algorithms that can run as that computing power grew. So today, to be very blunt, you should be switching all your designs to a QRNG now. And it's not because your particular algorithm may get broken this afternoon. It's because the data that you're encrypting this afternoon is being copied by somebody somewhere. In fact, it's probably being copied by many dozens of people somewhere, many of whom are good people, but may get hacked a year from now. So your data is generally out there and it's encrypted. And if the ability to decrypt it is invented in 2 years, then the fact that you encrypted it with a TRNG today is not going to make your life any easier 2 years from now if it gets broken. So there is, in addition to generally the rise of computing power, there is another basic problem, or capability, which is hackers know that they can actually step in and create weak random numbers in your system. This has actually been done before on multiple occasions. For those of you who care about it afterwards, you can contact me and I'll send you the long list of stuff I have with cool hacks. But, it's been done to everybody from Intel to Tesla, where people looked at the key as the weak point in a system and attacked the key in the system. One of the kind of attacks is like this, where somebody might look at something like your cell phone, which most people do banking on. I do not. Until I'm switching back to it now that I have a QRNG in my phone, but I did not all along because I didn't trust it. Because people, what they can do is they can affect your phone, because if they know what or any system you make, I said phone, any system you make with encryption can be affected. If they know what TRNG is in your system, they can use external methods to basically affect your TRNG so that it stops measuring, any random noise. And by affecting it with a periodic signal or any kind of signal, it's technically no longer a random number. So now you're creating a key that wasn't created with a purely random number. And of course, they can rip that apart and steal the information. So that's the kind of thing it can't be done with a QRNG, because not only is the QRNG pure randomness, as proved by quantum physicists like Niels Bohr and Schrodinger and Heisenberg and even Einstein, Podolsky and Rosenberg, not only is it pure randomness, but it is not susceptible to external events like thermal, electromagnetism, and all those kind of things that do affect the TRNGs that are most commonly used today or for the last 10 years. So QRNGs offer the ultimate randomness. Now, what else has been done? This is showing one particular version. There are many versions of QRNG, but the other thing that's happened is QRNGs have existed for 20 years. But 20 years ago, they were big. They were, desktop size. They were 23 inches wide by 6 inches tall by 14 inches, deep. Today, they've shrunk down to a device that is 2.5 millimeters by 3 millimeters. Or some of them are, it depends upon which one you use, but it's all, let's say, less than 5 millimeters square. And some of them are pretty small. So they're low cost for mass production. They're in this cell phone, small footprint, rugged semiconductor chips that are easy to implement in any design you're doing. If you're doing a design today that has encryption, you just take a hard look on the simple, easy to add QRNG to upgrade to quantum enhanced cybersecurity. In addition to the low power consumption that can be used in a battery operated device like a cell phone, there's ruggedized versions already for things like automobiles and things like that. And different kinds of sleep modes. There's all kinds of things that are available today in the market so that you have a lot of choices. You don't have to look at it and say, oh, that's only good for telecommunications or that's only good for governments. This is now out there in the mass market for any market you can think of. How does it work? At the root of it, there's a light source. And as was proved almost coming up about 100 years ago, and next year it'll be 100 years before the first theory was put forward. But light is one of the whole things with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and some of the work done by Schrodinger and Niels Bohr was there's a randomness aspect, one that at first Albert Einstein refused to accept. But later on, while working on it, sort of backhandedly proved that it was true. Light is fundamentally random. So what we're taking advantage of at the CMOS semiconductor level is creating photons, immediately capturing the photons. The actual photons don't travel very far. They travel, micrometers, not even a millimeter kind of a thing. But, creating photons, immediately capturing the photons, all with very standard low-cost technology in the semiconductor space. Our filtering in QRNG-based filtering is the opposite of the kind of filtering done by TRNGs, the things that you might be using today. That is to say, filtering for QRNG is there to absolutely make sure that none of the environmental noise gets into or somehow bleeds into the quantum signal. So current TRNGs, or classical random number generators, rely on environmental noise to try to extract randomness, and they try very hard to exclude periodicity, and it's very difficult to do, and to be sure you've done it. Whereas in our case, since we're just collecting the information from the light, we put in place filtering to make sure that we're not even allowing anything environmental to get into our device. That's it. The rest is pretty straightforward. Puts out quantum entropy. There is different kinds of technologies available for health status and for post-processing, and that depends upon what you want to do. So there are some of you who are on this call, from what I saw in the past, who do work with governments around the world, and they tend to care about various specs, one of the more popular ones being the NIST 800-90, but also things like FIPS 140-2 or the new FIPS 140-3. Germany cares an awful lot about BSI's ASI 31 specs. So in the end, all of these different standards have kind of different requirements, health check, status check, and things like that. So some of the QRNGs available have that built in and some do not. There are plenty of people, particularly in the Internet of Things space, who look at that as overkill that was put in place because of weaknesses in the TRNG and even weaknesses in the much older PRNG, and that because the quantum entropy is a pure source, that you don't need that extra post-processing. That's up to you. You can get it both ways. In fact, there are many devices that have it as an option. You can buy a device and use the quantum entropy, or you can use the RNG post-processed output. Generally speaking, the industry does both. Not everyone in the industry making QRNGs does both, but most people do both. How does it work? Now, this is a little bit into IDQ, which is my company. I I don't really know exactly how every other company who was involved does it, and this is not on the big stuff. We still make big equipment for data centers and big equipment for server farms. This is really at the individual design level. But if you think about what you're doing today in any particular design you might be doing, you have a processor, von Neumann architecture setup, which could be 6 different chips. The CPU could be separate from the memory, could be separate from the encryption engine, or it could be one chip, very common today, system on a chip, where those same 6 blocks are built into one chip. From our point of view in today's discussion for QRNGs and quantum enhanced encryption, it doesn't matter whether you are doing that in 6 separate chips on a board or in one chip. I will say the phone that I showed you before, it is all on one chip. But I would say maybe a slight majority of the designs I've seen, the encryption is a separate chip from the CPU, but there's certain plenty of people where it's integrated. In the end, it works the same. The CPU reaches a point where a data file has to be encrypted, and it uses code, it's running code, to tell the encryption engine, hey, encrypt this. And it's really the same thing, even if it's a communications channel, whether it's audio or video, like this meeting that we're all in now. Because all an audio or video communication channel is it's my voice or my video stream diced up into a series of, a couple of millisecond long data packets is all it really is. So in the end, it's still just encrypting data packets. It just has the added functionality of tracing the data packets so they can be reassembled on the other end, in a consecutively to reassemble as voice and video. So in the end, the encryption engine reaches out to the local random number generator and it grabs a new random number to create a new key pair, public-private key pair, and it encrypts the file. And it hands it all back to the CPU. Now different designs. Handing it back to the CPU may look different for an Internet of Things design with their concept of root of trust than it does for other people designs where they do key stores. I mean, if you look at it, a key store in a cell phone and a root of trust in an Internet of Things look very similar. There are some subtle differences. Different implementations slightly on what it means when an encryption ends it back to a CPU, but that's more about where things get stored, not about what the encryption engine does. It's more about what does a designer do to protect the keys once he's created the keys and the data that's been encrypted is handed back to the CPU. Now, when you want to use a quantum version, it's the whole process runs the same. The CPU says, hey, I got a data file and I want to encrypt it. So hand it to the encryption engine. And the encryption engine says, hey, reaches out for a random number. But now it's actually reaching out to the QRNG chip for the random number. And in the case of an integrated processor, like on a cell phone, it's doing that out of, let's say, like an I2C interface. In the case of a distributed design where the encryption engine might be separate from the CPU, it might still be an I2C interface, but it's more commonly an SPI interface. For whatever reason, a large number of encryption engines have an SPI interface. But in the end, one of these simple, easy to use buses is connected to your encryption engine, either through the SoC or through a standalone device. And now you have quantum enhanced encryption because the key was created using a quantum random number, which is a pure random number that could not have been tampered with or polluted or for some reason, some weakness from the legacy TRNG technology.
Tom, we actually have a question about the SPI model. What is the footprint for the SPI version?
So there's 2 answers to that. The hardware answer is the smallest footprint for the SPI version is 5 millimeters by 4 millimeters rectangle. And the software answer is first that there is no software that runs on our inside of our device that you touch or can touch. But we do give you some drivers to run on your CPU on how to read the SPI bus for the data coming out. So basically, when you power up our device, it starts streaming out data. And what you can read is you can read the registers for the health of our device. The registers will just say, Yes, the light source is doing what light source is supposed to be doing and it's been checked out. And yes, the sensor is doing what a sensor is supposed to be doing. And so that code for reading health check and all that stuff is something we give you. The actual code change in the CPU to tell the encryption engine to use the quantum random number generation, that depends upon whether you're running Windows or Linux or Android. It's a bit different, but it can be anywhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 20 lines of code. It just depends upon the operating system you're running and how the software you already have already has a place in it where the encryption engine reaches out for the random number generation, and you just need to change those couple of lines of code to reach out for the quantum random number generation. And we give you that sample code from we give you both the drivers to read the registers for the health of the device as well as the sample code, as a reference for
Yeah.
Windows, Linux, and Android.
Okay, thank you. There's a follow-up question. Actually, the question also, and personally, I don't understand it. I don't know these standards. The question is QFN BGA or micro BGA?
So one of these, some of these devices are LGBAs and some are micro BGAs. I think that if I understand the question. So BGA is ball grid array, if I'm understanding the question. LGA is the difference between BGA and LGA. They look about the same size, then the same footprint. In fact, they have the same footprint. We did on purpose. The difference is that a BGA has a solder ball on the bottom and an LGA does not. And that's just a printed circuit board manufacturing issue, if I understood the question correctly.
Yes. So Carl was asking the question, is saying thanks.
Great. Excellent. Great. Thank you for those questions. So that is the end of the basics on the QRNG. I want to spend a couple of minutes just giving you a little background information on where it fits in your system. Some of you might already see it, but just in case. So one is crypto agility. So I want to talk about crypto agility, and I'm talking about it from the point of view of the keys, quantum random number generation and the keys. There are other things to consider that I will leave for another day or another discussion or somebody else to have the discussion. But when you look at this, these are some pretty standard algorithms that have been around for a long time. Like RSA, is one of the earliest really good algorithm. It's time to retire RSA. That's not my opinion. There's a lot of science and calculation on that. There's nowhere to go with RSA. It will be replaced eventually with PQC. Today, RSA and ECC really should be replaced. It's not that anyone has completely ripped them apart yet, but if you're encrypting something with RSA today, then in 2 to 4 or 5 years, people are going to be opening up and just reading it. So the information may be safe now, but people have a copy of it. So unless you change your bank account every year, or unless your car, if you're going to drive your car for 5 years and something's encrypted now, and somebody breaks it 3 years from now, it means they can take over your car 3 years from now while you're driving in it, if it's using RSA for the encryption. Even if they can't take it over now, they save the RSA encryption and read it now. So there are issues with AES and hash-based functions where people have a much higher level of confidence in them than RSA and ECC, but there are still concerns. And then there's all of the post-quantum cryptography potential ones. So this is not quite settled all yet. The NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has 3 alternate candidate styles under technologies, or I hesitate to call them product, but algorithms under evaluation. And I'm not going to make any predictions where that goes. I'm very much just following closely the post-quantum cryptography algorithms. But from the point of view of our discussion today, they still all require random numbers. And quantum random numbers are a pure random number and making a better key, and you want to use those. You could certainly, if you wanted to, use one of those future algorithms with the old-fashioned TRNG, but I don't know why you would do that when the QRNG is available. Then a couple of other things but I think from time's sake point of view, we might be a little bit short on time. So I'll just say that there's other things you can do as well, which is like quantum key distribution. This is outside of our near term topic, but if you think about the key, it's being created by hopefully a quantum random number generation. But when it's being created, it's traveling through the internet. And so people can take them. People do take them. People collect keys just to say, hey, I'm going to collect keys. And maybe 2 years from now, I'll have a strong enough computer with a strong enough algorithm to break, a million of the keys. I'm going to collect 20 million keys, and maybe 2 years from now, I can break a million of them, and I can go find out what they open and see if some of them are bank accounts or whatever, right? So with quantum key distribution, you make it so that even a key made today that might be a weaker key, you can at least transition it through the internet without it being able to be stolen. So it's a technology to consider. But the key takeaways is do not delay. The crypto winter is coming, and it will affect data that you are encrypting today. This afternoon, if you use your laptop computer or your phone to talk to your bank account, somebody is keeping a copy of that, and they may be able to open it in 2 years. So you're better off to switching to unbreakable security as fast as possible. Got to be interesting to see what happens once unbreakable security is deployed. I'm wondering, will banks come out and make you change all your bank accounts so that when somebody can break the older stuff, it won't be useful anymore. Anyways, so know your data, know what your vulnerabilities are for your market, and how fast you need to put in stuff. If you make a product that gets thrown away every year, you are in less of a hurry than if you make a product like an automobile. It's going to be out there for 5 to 10 years. So if somebody can break it 4 years from now, that's a danger. That's a as a 19-year-old kid in Europe proved 2 weeks ago when he broke the keys for a Tesla car and used people's apps to take over their Tesla cars. And he did it as a white hack. He didn't do anything bad with it. He gave it to Tesla and said, fix it. Look what I did, But imagine if he was a bad actor and wanted to do something bad with that. And then pursue crypto agility. Put in place the ability to update. So when the post-quantum cryptography becomes available, imagine if you could make a system that's deploying now, not only with your QRNG, your quantum random number to make the best possible key, but also if you're running AES algorithm, you could update it to a PQC algorithm. Wouldn't it be nice if you could be deploying crypto agility to your customers now? One size does not fit all. Take a look at your market. Give me a call if you want some help. There's a picture of that phone I was telling you about just for the fun of it. There's a bunch of markets. During the networking, a few people talked to me about a couple of things. I wanted to just show you a few things. I think somebody mentioned here in the last 2 minutes, I'll show you. Somebody mentioned about texting. There's Signal texting app is a pretty popular around the world. It competes with WhatsApp and other texting apps, instant messaging apps. And it's an open one, meaning people can make add-ons to it. There's already a quantum safe one available. It detects any phone manufactured with a QRNG inside of it and turns it on and begins using it to make a key based on QRNG instead of the TRNG. It also has some pre-PQC algorithms that it'll run for you. I'm not an expert on them. That's not IDQ's product. It's these other companies' product. But it is crypto agile, meaning they will update their PQC algorithms to match whatever NIST finally signs off on in 2 years. Automobiles, there's already automobile work going on to protect cars, not just the V2X, not just your car's communication to the outside world, which is what V2X means, vehicle to the outside world, but also in vehicle. There's an infamous hack where somebody took over the radio, the infotainment system in a Jeep, and then repurposed the processor in that Jeep and took over the engine in the Jeep and shut off the engine for users. And, as an example, so you need to protect the end vehicle security as well. But you know what? You need to protect everything. Within my house, I have an electronic control for the heating and the air conditioning in my house so that whether it's summer and winter, I'm using the bare minimum of electricity for comfort, right? But somebody could hack that and and turn off my heat in the middle of the winter and freeze my pipes or some other bad thing. So everything needs to be protected. Even an inexpensive, $100 piece of electronics that runs the heating and cooling in my house needs the highest level of protection. And I'm going to leave. That's my 45 minutes. You've all been very patient, and I'm going to be available for as many questions as you want before I go to the networking room. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. And I remind everybody you can ask your questions in the Q&A tab or the chat tab. I do have a question about the bit rates. If you have different classes of products, so in a cell phone, I guess you might do with a few kilobit per second of random bits, but in a data center, it's another issue. And you did mention both applications. So what's the bit rates available?
So from a product point of view, we have definitely done that from a product point of view. You're absolutely right. I'm going to call it from the end user, and what I'll call the far edge devices do not need a lot of new keys. They need more than you'd think, but you're right. My cell phone, the amount of work I do, it's actually the best possible applications. If you're running an application, if somebody has designed an application well, it should be changing keys fairly often anyways from that point of view, but it's still only, keys per minute, not millions of keys per second. So on one end of the scale, you have things like Internet of Things device, like the picture I'm showing you, where, certainly kilobits per second of randomness is more than sufficient. And our goal from a product point of view is to make the smallest device with the lowest power consumption device, because some of these things run off of batteries, and also the physical low profile device, no heat put off, all that kind of stuff. And it turns out it's almost hard for us to make a device that's less than 250,000 bits per second. So even though most of those applications don't even need 1/10 of that, the lowest bit rate that we make is 250 kilobits per second. If I could make a lower power consumption device by shrinking the bit rate, I would. We are continuing to invest in making lower power consumption devices. We're already in cell phones and Internet of Things devices, but we want to be in things like, the networking room. Before this, one of the people talked about a camera where you put it on your shirt, like a buttonhole camera, right? And that's super low power. That actually, the power consumption requirement there is harder to meet than a cell phone. So in order to be in that, we would actually have to further reduce our power consumption, but where we're at today. Actually, I think we could fit in that one, the buttonhole camera. But there are some devices, some super low power consumption applications that we will need to further reduce the power consumption. On the other end of the scale, and we have all kinds of products in between the high end and the low end scale, but on the other end of the scale, we have products that are in data centers that put out hundreds of millions of bits per second of randomness, for a rack of servers, as an example. You don't want to overshare randomness too much, because if you're sending randomness and you're transmitting it, that in itself, if you're transmitting the randomness, becomes an access point for hackers or bad actors. So we certainly believe in local randomness, but it's considered, if you have a rack full of servers in a data center, it's fairly normal. You want to install one box that's a QRNG doing hundreds, millions, even gigabits per second of randomness to serve a farm, a rack or a couple of racks of servers. So we certainly have products from one end to the other, including 4 chips, and including 3 board level products, and then really only one high end box still. There's not a need for a lot of different kinds of high end box.
Okay, thank you. There's another comment from Manuel. I think seeing your last slide might be a good question, considering that every IoT device is a possible hack point. Do we really need to connect everything to the internet? Do we need a toaster connected to the internet?
So here's the thing. You said need. It's not about need, it's about want. I'll take that right there in the picture. the little bit of the mobile vacuum cleaner. The fact is that the first generation of mobile vacuum cleaners made right down the road from where I live, by the way, in Boston, where original design was here. The very first one years ago, made by iRobot, not too far from me. The original ones had a simple processor on board, and it used sensors, and it tried to do things like not bump into your furniture too much. And and boy, if a vacuum cleaner picks up sugar, that's good. But if it sucks up water, that's bad because it ruins the vacuum cleaner. So how does it know the difference between sugar, which you want to vacuum, and water, which you don't want to vacuum, right? So all of those things, they're wirelessly connected today. They all have a little wireless connection, and they all have a little camera on it so that it doesn't bump into your furniture. And sensors, well, you know what? That camera can watch you. So if a hacker takes over uses the wireless connection of your vacuum cleaner to take it over, it can use it to watch your family, to see things you don't want them to see, an invasion of privacy. And your refrigerator, right? Your next generation refrigerators have built in, as an example, ammonia sensors. They're going to start detecting rot. They're going to tell you when something in your food refrigerator is 2 days away. Use it now or freeze it now, or it will spoil. And some of those algorithms are going to run local, and some of them people are going to connect them to the internet, and they're going to want your refrigerator. You're going to want your refrigerator. You're going to be sitting there shopping for food, and you're going to pull up your phone, and you're going to look inside your refrigerator to see if you need to buy more eggs or not. Geez, do I need to buy milk? And there's going to be a camera in your next generation refrigerator, and you're going to look. And so people are going to buy it. It's not you said need. What's need? We have food and clean air. That's what we need. But in the end, will people want it? Absolutely, they want it. So the fact is, it's going to be there, and it becomes a point of access for hackers.
Yeah, the point being that the devices are going to be out there one way or another.
Yeah. Now I picked this picture on purpose, and I like to finish with a joke. Most of these things, some of these things are already wired. Some of these things, like your stove, you can already get an update, a wireless update, right? And like the vacuum cleaner, the broom is there because in my heart, I'm waiting for them to, make an electronic version of a Quidditch broom. But other than that, everything else here is in the real world, and your key fobs are already wirelessly connected and could be hacked, which you can see on the little desk there. There's a key fob, and your coffee pot. You're going to want to turn on your coffee pot remotely when you're driving home, at some point. And it becomes a hack. What if somebody turns it on or, and lets it boil off all the coffee and becomes a danger, So, in the end, everything needs security.
Okay, we have two other questions. I will continue with another one by Manuel, related also to these rates, these kilobits per second of randomness. It's a question about the user. Does it mean that the encryption key is changed at that rate? Or maybe a more general question is how do your clients typically use the randomness? Is it for key rotation?
So that is my client's decision. So I'll give you an example in video surveillance. It's a market I worked in for a long time. Selling high-end processors originally to high-end cameras. So I was involved with video surveillance when they switched from analog cameras to digital cameras. And when they first did that, they didn't encrypt anything. They just streamed the video. Anybody could see the video if they were smart enough to figure out the IP access point of the video. Anybody could watch any video in the world, really. Wasn't that hard. And they quickly realized they needed to encrypt things, etc. But they would make a camera with one key. In the manufacturing site, they'd make it with one key for life. And there's already some governments who've put in place the idea that for a camera, hang on for a second, somebody told me to stop sharing. They've already put in place that for a camera, you need to change the key at least once per second, because if it's a government key, if it's a government buying video surveillance cameras, they want it as a minimum that the key gets changed once per second. It's just really good practice. Now, does everybody do it? Nope. You can, the plenty of cheap cameras out there aren't going to do it, but in time, everybody will do it. It's just generally good practice. It's really easy to do. It takes up almost no effort to change the key on a regular basis. And it's a really good fight against hackers to regularly change the keys. So what I would say to you is all of my customers who are really into cybersecurity, they change them regularly and often.
All right, thank you. Another question by Carl. How does QRNG security compare to the NXP devices used in many USB security keys?
So NXP has a lot of different kinds of devices. So I'll give you a little bit. They have everything from processors with built-in encryption to TPMs, which are encryption and authentication devices, standalone. In that picture I showed you earlier, where I talked about sometimes these things are done with SoCs, all built in one chip, and sometimes they're done with standalone pieces. NXP does both. NXP has a very broad range of products, and to my knowledge, and I am not an expert on every product they make, but to my knowledge, the majority of their products use what we call the classical RNG or the TRNG based version. And to my knowledge, at this moment, none of them are yet doing QRNGs. I do have customers who are putting my QRNG chip down next to NXP devices and designs. I have to go back and check how many, but I have at least a couple. I have people working with me, putting my chips next to Qualcomm chips, putting my chip next to NXP chips. And the reason is that, again, they're upgrading the existing encryption in those devices, but having them, instead of grabbing the older style random number generated, grabbing a QRG.
So a lot of the advice that you gave today about how to increase the security of systems are really in the realm of the system integrators or system designers. So whoever can actually select the chip, put it in the. I guess that your final take, one of your key takeaway, as you said, to make a pun, is for system designers to start adopting these technologies. Is there anything that end users can do also?
Yeah, it's one of the things we do support. As an example, the company who developed the application add-on for Signal software, we help them. Turns out we didn't have to help much. Once I explained something to them in 30 minutes, they took a look at the software. They called me back to say they were done. It wasn't that hard, but we like to help the app developers, because in the end user, unless the end user is creating his own apps, right now the end user's access to this level of security is at the application level. Now, if there's anybody who's watching this right now who is an app developer, you could develop apps, and it would look for one of the models of phone that a QRNG, and you could let your customers know for your app that if they're using a phone that is a QRNG, that you are implementing that a higher level of security. That is what a couple of app developers are already doing.
So these apps, they could only, of course, they needed also the QRNG chip in the phone. So you need a phone, a model of the phone with the chip inside to get the full advantage of the QRNG encryption.
Right. So in the case of one of those app developers, they develop the app, and technically anyone, if you're paid for it, but anyone could download it. But their focus has been on customers that they have who want the highest level of security, and they go to them and say, for your, I don't know, whatever, for your 250 executives, go buy 250 of one of these phones and then run our app. And then you have security that is above anyone else's in the world, as an example. Now, that's their business model. But frankly, you could go right now and download the app if you're willing to pay for it. It's not cheap, but if you're willing to pay for it, and you could run it right now.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions, and it's now almost ringing 11:30. So I guess that it would be my chance to thank you again for accepting our invitation and to talk about this real technology that can now be deployed at scale. So thank you again, and I would invite all the participants to stay a while. We will keep the platform live for probably again another hour, and do feel free to stay and chat amongst yourselves and with our guest.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.